Hey everyone, and welcome back. In today's episode of D&D Horror Stories, we have a few tales of one of the many things that can sometimes plague a campaign of Dungeons & Dragons: Spotlight Hogs. But before we get into that, Ziggy has a message.
Channeru Tereki Yoroshiku Onegai Shimasu. Nya.
Thanks, Ziggy. But with that out of the way, let's get into these stories. Why I, as a DM, never allow persuasion rolls between PCs. By Reddit user Lilium Darkright. It's been a while since my last post, so I figured I'd give it another shot. This happened years ago. If memory serves, this was the second campaign I was ever part of, and had not begun DMing myself yet. Dialogue is all mostly paraphrasing, as the events of this campaign happened roughly 4 years ago. You all know the drill by now. All names included here are fake. So here's our list of characters. Cassie, first-time DM with a penchant for the Feywild. Myself, a homebrew Warforged artificer with very high intelligence and wisdom. Troy, high intelligence human wizard. Isaac, Kentku rogue and first-time player. Amanda and Rachel, Centaur Bards, yes, plural. And the problem players for tonight's story. There were a few other party members, but none of them are particularly important to the story. This campaign had been running for a long time at this point, focused around resurrecting a dead nature goddess before life started to die out on the material and mortal plane. Our party had been in the Feywild for several sessions now, which frankly everyone was sick of, but that's a story for another day. My first character, a tiefling monk, had recently left the party over trust issues, due to them attempting to sell him into magical slavery in order to convince a powerful Fey enchanter to spare them. So, naturally, the DM needed to find a way to introduce my new character to the party. Cassie took this opportunity to allow a few new players to join the main party alongside my artificer, flavoring it as two parties teaming up. This is where Amanda and Rachel both joined the campaign, alongside a satyr paladin and my artificer. In the session that ensued, Amanda and Rachel quickly made themselves the centers of attention. Or you could say centaurs of attention, am I right? Sorry. No problem, I thought. That's just what bards tended to do. However, this would soon morph into insisting they were going to both lead the party, and that we were all going to do what they said. This is frankly a ridiculous request to make in D&D at all, let alone to an 8-person party. Amanda in particular grew increasingly heated and frustrated with the majority of players not being okay with this, arguing for about 20 minutes and completely deadlocking any progress that was to be made in the campaign. This continued until we all heard Rachel giggling to herself as she interjected to narrate how her bard burst into a song about how stupid the party was, and how they needed to let the two actually smart ones take the lead. Obviously, most of the party was not particularly concerned at this point, until we heard Cassie speak. The conversation went something like this. Cassie, alright. Rachel, as you begin to sing to the party, make me a persuasion check. Troy, wait, what? Why would that? Amanda, cutting Troy off. Oh, my bard will join Rachel in song, so she gets advantage. Troy, why would that sound any more sensible in song form? Is the song magical? If so, I cast counterspell. Cassie, also cutting Troy off. Alright then, Rachel, go ahead and roll persuasion on the party with advantage. Anyone wanting to contest this, roll your own persuasions. This got me pretty frustrated, to say the least. The reason I mentioned I was playing a homebrew artificer is because the class hadn't officially entered D&D 5e yet, and this homebrew variant was based on wisdom. My character had double proficiency bonuses in insight and a 20 in wisdom. If anyone could sniff out bullshit, it was her. But by allowing Rachel and Amanda to roll persuasion on the party, and forcing us to contest it with our own persuasion checks, and the fact that most of us had used charisma as a dump stat, Cassie had effectively given the bards the keys to the campaign. And of course, nobody beat Rachel's roll due to her insane bonuses to persuasion and combined advantage. Can you guess what happened next as the session continued after this? Did you guess that Rachel and Amanda continued to constantly abuse their newfound ability to control the party with simple persuasion rolls, as if we were NPCs? If so, then you get a bardic inspiration. After the fourth or so instance of this, wherein Amanda and Rachel began to duet after a combat encounter, that we should give them all of the golden loot we had, as well as anything else we'd get during our adventures, since they could supposedly keep better track of it, I snapped and put my foot down. I said, "Fuck that. How can you possibly convince us to hand everything to your characters for the rest of the campaign? What possible talking points could your characters have to make this all appealing?" Cassie was upset by this, reminding me that I had to accept the results of the rolls at her table, to which I promptly informed her that I no longer was going to participate in this campaign, and left the Discord call. Not my proudest moment, but I was seeing red after putting so much effort into a character, just to have her turned into a glorified NPC via a series of absurd persuasion rolls. Isaac would later tell me that Cassie ended the session pretty soon after that, and that Troy also left the campaign. Isaac decided to stay in the game just out of some desire to see just how much of a train wreck it could be. He would later tell me that the campaign fizzled out and died, as the DM had given the party a plot-important letter, but Rachel decided she was going to be the one to hold on to it, and that the party should never read it unless she says so, naturally succeeding in persuasion checks with Amanda's assistance to make it so. And with no way for the party to get the only important plot hook Cassie had planned to give to the party, sessions apparently became hours-long slogs of trying to convince Amanda and Rachel to hand over the letter, or the rogue trying to steal it off the bards to no success. According to Isaac, the campaign fizzled and died not long after. It is because of this awful experience that I have never allowed the party in my campaigns to roll persuasion on each other. Well, screw that. If my players want to convince each other, they better actually convince each other. While the two bards were definitely problem players in this case, I would put the majority of the blame on that DM. The DM essentially gave those two mind control powers, fully taking away any agency that the rest of the players had. And I'm not surprised to hear that that campaign ended up dying after OP had had enough and left, which I totally don't blame her for. At least OP was able to learn a bit of a lesson from this though, and not allow that type of thing to happen in her games. Though, what would you have done in this situation? I'm legit curious. Let's move on. Campaign was cancelled abruptly because DM's girlfriend couldn't be the main character. By Reddit user eHorn. 3 years ago, after meeting a girl through Discord and talking to her for a while, she invited me to play D&D with her friends. So I joined their server and we played a single campaign for 2 years. It was great, both in terms of combat and roleplay. The people there were pretty friendly, and it had a satisfying conclusion. Just so I can stop saying girl in this post, the group for the second campaign consisted of Artificer, the one that invited me, also DM's girlfriend. Fighter, joined the group when the first campaign was nearly over, also invited by Artificer. Rogue and Wizard, two chill people that unfortunately were also there. Cleric, me, and the DM. Starting the second campaign, it was obvious that everyone was much more comfortable role-playing from the very beginning this time, whereas most of the first campaign consisted of Artificer talking to NPCs. While the group was having fun connecting their characters and stories, Artificer played exactly like in the first campaign, interacting with us like she's a Paragon video game protagonist, and we are followers whose stories need to be solved by her. It actually worked last time, both because everyone was much more awkward around each other, and her character had the highest charisma. But on this campaign, Fighter and I ended up sharing the position of leaders due to our better charisma, and the group no longer left long stretches of silence in the call for Artificer to fill. While everyone was having a blast, Artificer actually started to get quieter and mute herself to talk in real life with the DM. Then, after a session, she sent me a DM on Discord. Out of nowhere, she told me that the reason why she liked playing D&D was because she could fulfill her fantasy of leading people and being more competent at things than everyone else. While I was processing that, she also told me that she regretted inviting Fighter because she was purposefully stealing the spotlight. She wasn't. She only made sure to yes-and what other people said. And that it was fucked up to take the group from her. When I asked what she meant, Artificer told me that Fighter controlled the random conversations that we had on Discord too often, but that was because the things that she was into happened to align more with the rest of the group, even though that was the only place where she, Artificer, could openly talk about anything. Fast forward a few weeks. Despite making the DM rewrite parts of the world to make her special again, she felt the game was ruined. So the DM dropped it while she was cutting ties with Fighter. A few days later, Artificer messaged me saying that while Fighter was banned, she could see that I was just autistic and bad at talking. Exact words, except she made it sound cute. So I was forgiven and could play a third campaign with them. Anyways, Fighter and I still talk to each other, though not as consistently due to losing our shared hobby, and we don't want to go back to it for a while. Also, if you feel clickbaited by the post title, it's just that I had no idea what to name it otherwise. Artificer definitely had main character syndrome, but that seemed to be a byproduct of how she actually was in real life. If she really wanted to play in a game where she is the main character, perhaps her boyfriend can run a solo campaign for her. Otherwise, D&D is a cooperative game, and every player and character should be given time to shine. It just sounds like Artificer may have had some self-esteem issues, and used D&D as a way to feel special. And once the other players got more comfortable with role-playing, she saw that as them trying to steal something from her. Though she does lose some sympathy points for saying that OP made an honest mistake by talking to other people because they are autistic. Not sure if OP is actually autistic, or she was just trying to use it in an endearing way. But either one of those is extremely tone-deaf. Though, what are your thoughts on this one? And before we move on to the final story of the day, I must ask, if you're enjoying the video so far, why not click the like button? It really does help the channel loads, and it makes Lucky super happy. See? Now let's get into it. Attention Seeker tries to get another player into legal trouble. By Reddit user, Hidden Windshield. This happened decades ago, but I only recently became aware of this subreddit, and I thought that maybe there would be a few people out there who would enjoy this story. My one and only experience with actually playing tabletop RPGs was when I was a freshman in college. Our group consisted of 5 people: Dave, the DM, myself, a rogue, Paul, the fighter and the problem player, Alex, the wizard, and Bob, the monk. Paul was the only one of us who lived off campus at the time, so we'd usually meet at his house to play. At first, Paul was perfectly fine to play with. Over time, though, he started to do more and more to push the rest of us aside and make himself the center of attention. In the first instance I can think of, we had just found a small locked box containing the cure to a plague that was affecting the local town. I said, I picked the lock. Or at least, that's what I was about to say. I got as far as saying nothing before Paul jumped in with, I smashed the box. Dave asked him if he was sure, and several other players asked him not to. I even told him that I had lockpicks right here, but he was adamant. So he did succeed in smashing the box, scattering powdered medicine all over the room, ruining it. After that, he began to do more and more to draw attention to himself. Once, we were meeting an informant at a tavern. Naturally, the fighter didn't have much to do, so he randomly went over to the biggest, burliest guy in the tavern and tried to pick his pocket. This failed, kicking off a bar brawl and ruining our chance to get information from the informant. Toward the end of the campaign, this would even extend to his in-real-life behavior. When someone else was narrating what they were doing, he would randomly interrupt to ask some pointless question or other. Or he'd randomly roll his dice for no reason. Or yawn loudly. Anything to draw attention to himself. Since Paul was the host, we had agreed from the beginning that the rest of us would take turns providing snacks. One session, he brought food anyway, just so he could then whine about how much it cost. I don't want to seem ungrateful for free food, especially as a student, but hearing him complain over and over and over again about money, when nobody had asked him to buy anything in the first place, really got tiring after a while. Also, he hadn't told anyone that he was going to do this, so the guy that was supposed to provide the food that day, Dave if I remember right, had already brought food, and so didn't actually save anything through his generosity. It all came to a head at the end of the year. This was going to be our last session for the semester, so we could all concentrate on studying for the finals. We were setting up, and the conversation mostly revolved around said finals. Alex just casually mentioned that the test he was most concerned about was already behind him. He had been working on his pilot's license and had just taken his check ride and was now a fully licensed private pilot. As you might expect, this completely derailed the conversation. We were all amazed and plied him with questions about being a pilot and flying, and planes in general. Well, all of us except Paul, who kept telling us to hurry up and start the game, even though we were still setting up as we were talking. Paul then started regaling us with stories about how his grandfather had been a fighter pilot in World War II, and how he knew a guy that was a pilot for a major airline. When that didn't succeed in taking the attention away from Alex, he told everyone he'd once been in a major plane crash and had been lucky to escape with his life. When we all called bullshit on that story, he just kind of shut down. He didn't say another word beyond the absolute minimum required to actually play the game. He just sat there and sulked. This naturally killed the mood at the table, and we wound up wrapping up early and heading home. Before we left, however, we all asked if Alex could take us flying. Paul, of course, said that he was busy, no matter when we suggested the meet. This actually worked out for us, because the place Alex rented from only had 2- and 4-seater planes available, and if it had been all 5 of us, he would have had to take us up in shifts. Hearing that only made Paul grumpier. Now, to understand this next part, you need to know that the FAA draws a sharp line between flying for fun and flying for profit, with certain exceptions. A private pilot isn't allowed to charge for their services, and in fact, must pay their fair share of flying expenses. Of course, back then, it would be a lot harder for an ordinary individual to know that. The internet wasn't nearly what it is now, and the FAA didn't routinely publish all of its rules on their website like they do today. So the only way to know was if you had read through a physical copy of the rulebook, or if someone had explained it to you. For instance, if you were listening in when a pilot was explaining the rules to some friends that he was planning a pleasure flight with. I'm sure you can see where this is going. Our first week back, Alex told me that he was under investigation by the FAA. Somebody claimed that we had paid him for our flight, and we each had to go to the FAA office and testify that we hadn't paid Alex anything. Of course, we all suspected who had done it, but we had no proof. That is, until we found out that Paul had been telling all of our circle of friends that Alex had lost his license. Alex said he hadn't told Paul about the investigation, so the only way he'd even suspect that Alex might be in trouble was if he'd been the one to make the false report. This was confirmed when Alex and I, and some other friends, were eating lunch one day, and he walked up, the first time we'd seen him since the end of last semester, and smugly asked Alex what it was like being grounded like the rest of us plebs. We all stopped being Paul's friend, and the FAA would go on to dismiss its case against Alex for lack of evidence. Wow, talk about an immature, vindictive prick. Paul's cup of salt truly did runneth over. It's amazing how stories like this, about people who always want to be the center of attention, always end up with them doing something to make the people stop hanging out with them. What Paul did was unforgivable. Going after someone's future livelihood simply because he got some more attention than you one day. People like this truly sicken me, and I hope that Paul rolls natural ones on all of his future endeavors. Have you ever had to deal with a Spotlight Hog in one of your games? If so, how did you go about handling it? And if you have a story that you would like this Doge to read, be sure to post a link in the comments on the DnD Doge subreddit, or even at me on Twitter. As always, I appreciate all of you, and hope all of your rolls are natural 20s. Until next time.